Welcome back to another episode of Marketing Girly. Today, I am so excited to be chatting with Jamie Dinar. She is the Director of Social Media and Community Marketing at Glossier. Welcome, Jamie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on, Jamie. I am very excited to jump through your entire career journey and how you ended up here at Glossier. But before we go into all of that, can you tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do?
All right, so I'm Jamie. Hi, everyone. I am leading the Glossier social media team. That means that I am building out a content strategy and execution for all of our organic social media channels, our hero channels, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, but we're also very active on Be Real, on Pinterest, Facebook, YouTube. So really understanding how to support brand initiatives and brand moments across these different channels that all have different personalities and different kinds of people following them.
Super interesting. I'm gonna have to definitely want to dive into your perspective on the role different channels play. I think especially since that landscape is always changing, I think that'll be super fun to dive into. And then you're based in New York, is that correct?
New Jersey
Oh, New
and
Jersey.
New York office, but I'm remote right now.
Okay, fully remote, or do you go into the office sometimes?
The office when I'm needed. Yeah, I'm mostly remote.
Okay, I love that. And then have you been in New Jersey throughout your entire career? Or like
I lived
there?
in New York until the pandemic, and then I moved to
Uh,
New Jersey. I'm down the shore now, so I'm a
okay.
beach girly.
I love it. How has that been?
Oh, it's been wonderful. I got a dog. The beaches and the ocean's my backyard. I have more space and multiple bedrooms.
Oh my gosh. I know, I
It's
feel
really,
like in New York, I always just see how tiny all the apartments are and how much you pay for rent. It's crazy.
before I moved out, I was in a 500 square foot shoebox because I had to live in Greenwich Village. It's where I wanted to be. So I sacrificed space.
Oh my
At the time
gosh.
I loved it, but now I'm just like, how did I ever live that way?
Where did all your clothes go?
Under my bed in little clear drawers. I did have a closet. But you could use your imagination how messy
Yeah.
that apartment was.
Yeah, I know. I think especially me, I know whenever I get dressed, my entire bedroom is covered in clothes. So I feel like if I lived in 500 square feet, there would just be clothes everywhere all the time.
It was a good time. It was a personality building.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so you're here at Glossier right now working in beauty, but as usual with the episodes, we always like to go back a little bit and kind of tell the journey of how you got to where you are now. And I kind of want to rewind. So just to give our listeners a quick overview of where Jamie's career kind of has gone, we're going to touch on each of these roles, but um recently, after graduating in journalism, Jamie went over to TED, where she was doing office management. Is that correct?
Yes, that is.
Okay, then switching over to Condé Nast as doing marketing. So that we're going to talk about that switch from office management to marketing, and then moving over to Calvin Klein, where she was for 4 years, working again in social media marketing and community. A brief stint at Michael Kors before going to Glossier. So you've kind of gone over in different industries and different roles. So I'm excited to kind of see what you learned along the way and how you made those transitions. But let's start over with you at TED and tell me a little bit about your role there and then how that kind of turned into you switching into marketing.
Right. So even just slightly before TED, just to kind of give context, even I graduated college, no job lined up. I could not find anything for the life of me. And at the time, that was the biggest stressor of my life. I wanted to be a journalist. I was only applying to journalism jobs and just nothing was sticking, or I was getting job offers with insultingly low salaries. Like it was just really, really tough at the time. So I took this office management role at TED Talks, an incredibly inspiring environment to work in. But the job itself maybe a little less glamorous than what I was hoping I would get my first job out of college. Everybody has very high expectations,
Yes, yes.
obviously. So I was really, cleaning dishes from the sink, answering phone calls, ordering office supplies. And that's really like the bulk of what I was doing. But I really just wanted to get my foot in. I needed to network. I wanted to meet people. I wanted to be in the city. That's really what got me there. And obviously I need to make money. eventually through constant applying, many rejections later, I did find my first role at Condé Nast, where I went to, I was in their corporate office, so I wasn't at a publication. In my mind, kind of justifying it like, okay, I want to be in journalism, but maybe with this marketing role in their corporate office, I could eventually transfer to a publication. I can get an editorial gig. That obviously didn't happen. I stuck it out with marketing, and I actually started to understand the more and more I worked in a marketing space that there is an opportunity for storytelling, and you can still build narratives, and there still is that creative aspect of marketing. Sorry, of storytelling that I love so much from journalism that I could bring into this new marketing role. What I also started to build an understanding of, which I think at the time I was so much in my head, I didn't really realize it, but in hindsight, looking back, really starting to understand the numbers, the analytics, the importance of insights, and making decisions based off of what has failed and what has worked in the past. So I think that's obviously a huge part of marketing, which, I started to pick up without even realizing I was picking up. My role at Condé Nast was not digital at all. It was fully a non-digital marketing role where I was working on inserts in magazines, or I was doing direct mailing. And I was getting this anxiety and getting into my head again of, oh, I'm missing out on these more innovative roles. Like the future of marketing is digital. This was 2015. So like, I don't know if these jobs still exist, but I had zero digital exposure, and I knew in my head to strategically set me up for long-term success, I needed to get that digital exposure. So I took a lateral move to Calvin Klein. This was a job that I just applied for, and I was chosen for an interview probably at random. So that does still also exist. You don't always need to have a connection, which I think is really important to
Yeah.
hear sometimes, because I know that the job search is in and of itself a whole other job. And, it's good to know that you could still organically get a position that you really want. So I did end up going to Calvin Klein, where I started in a digital marketing capacity. I was a digital marketing coordinator.
Okay.
And yeah.
Let me pause you there before you jump into Calvin Klein, because I really love how you shared your thinking behind each of those career moves. They weren't like, oh, I just don't want this job, I want to go somewhere else. You kept learning more about yourself, and you kept figuring out like what you wanted, and then each job kind of took you closer to that. Um, you mentioned that when you graduated college, before you went over to TED, you were getting a lot of job offers that had like ridiculous salaries. Can you just touch on that for 1 second? Because I know there's a lot of recent graduates who are on the job hunt and really want to just get hired because being unemployed sucks. And then you're on the job hunt for a while and you get a job offer and it's super low and you feel like you're kind of in a tough spot of like, okay, well, do I just keep staying unemployed, or do I take this offer that's, for less than what I want? Do you have any advice there when like you're starting to apply to jobs and you're not really getting good salaries, and like how to, find something that will pay you obviously what you need to live in New York, I'm sure is, more than the bare minimum. So do you have any like recommendations or advice there?
Everybody's situation is different. So I can't give catch-all advice for everyone. For me, I needed a job to survive. So that's why I ended up getting this office management role at TED while I was continuing to apply and apply. And I think something that I just kept thinking about when I was getting these job offers that just like were not viable options for me if I wanted to move out of my parents' house was, is this what I'm worth? And I think that that's something that a lot of people maybe, when you're lacking the confidence, when you're just graduating and like you don't have the experience,
Yeah.
but you still are providing value to that company. And I think that's something that I've learned along the way is just nobody's going to advocate for yourself but you. And I think that when you're looking at a job and, maybe it's your dream job and you're like, all right, I'm going to sacrifice the money aspect. Like, I'm not going to be compensated how I want, but this will give me legs for the next move, or this is where I'm really going to learn what I need to do. And I think you just need to kind of balance out, like, am I going to get the exposure and learn what I need to learn to get to my next job? Or is this just not the opportunity for me because this is something I'm just taking because I just want a job, and I want to like start learning and growing my career and not just having a job, having a career. I think it's really just having that conversation with yourself, getting advice from others who are in the same field. That would really be my take on it. It's really just dependent on, do you feel like you are you undervalued with what they're offering you?
Yeah, I think that's really, really good advice because when you are recently graduating, you don't have a lot of experience. I think it's easy to undervalue yourself, but your biggest asset at that point is that you're going to work hard and you're going to learn a ton, and there is a ton of value in that and in you at that point. And I think it's really discouraging. I know the job market is hard to kind of doubt that. I also want to point out that you were only at TED for 7 months. And I think sometimes there's also this misconception that you can't, if you have a job, you have to stay there for like a certain amount of time, or else it's going to look bad on, your resume. And I think what you did was really smart is you got a job that was going to help you get connections that you were going to learn, but you kept applying. You didn't give up on that dream of doing something else. And you didn't have to stay at a job that you didn't love for 2 years or 3 years just to like check that box off, but that you moved on to something else. To get closer to where you wanted to be.
I think something that when I was younger, and I imagine a lot of younger folks probably get into the habit of doing this, is you're very much in your head and you're very much like almost like nearsighted sometimes. Like you're thinking of the now and you're not thinking of what's next to come. And I think that it's really important when you are looking for that job and kind of juggling, is this the right move for me or should I keep looking? Is this is where you are now, but what can it lead you to? I think that's kind of how I looked at my career growth. And as we continue talking to, like, you'll like I kind of hinted, like I was at Condé Nast, or I was at TED. I knew I wanted to go into marketing or journalism. So I got into Condé Nast, and then I knew I needed digital exposure. I did a lateral move to Calvin. Like I think there's going to be a life beyond that first job. So it's really just having or training yourself to have that foresight to be very forward thinking in your job discovery.
Yeah, I think that is so valuable. And I think a lot of people don't spend as much time thinking about that because you're right. We're thinking about the now. What do I want now? Instead of thinking 2 jobs from now, where is this going to take me, or how does this play into what I want for my future? So we'll go back to the switch here. So Condé Nast, you're in marketing, not in digital though. You need a digital exposure. So you made a lateral move to get into Calvin Klein. I'm curious because I imagine being the digital marketing coordinator for Calvin Klein is a really exciting role because Calvin Klein's huge. It's in fashion. It's in New York. So what do you think kind of helped you stand out and land that role to get your foot in the door there in digital? And I know you said that you didn't have a referral there.
Right. I have this running theory that they saw Condé Nast and they assumed I worked on Vogue. In reality, I was on the New Yorker and Wired, so I was nowhere near fashion at all. But that's my running theory. I mean, having been on the other side where I have personally been through the gamut of running through resumes for a coordinator role to hire on my current team, there's just certain things you look for. And I think for me, and it's not always like the big brands, like obviously Condé Nast is a massive brand, it's very recognizable. That definitely helps. But I think it's also too making sure that I have no proof that this is actually like valid advice. This is just what I've heard through the grapevine, but making sure that you cater your cover letters and your resumes to the specific job title. Maybe even looking at the bullet points that are listed as your, like what the job description is, and making sure that you are customizing your resume and your cover letter to answer what is asked of you in the job description. I don't know if it's search based. I don't know how the recruiters work through it, but that's always been a running theory for me.
That's a good one. And I think I feel like sometimes people think about it from, oh, well, resumes are being scanned and they're looking for keywords. And I think that's part of it. But I also think when you customize your resume, it makes it easier for the recruiter to identify you as a match for the role of like, we're looking for someone with this experience. And maybe you have something very similar, but you just didn't word it the same way that that company is talking about it. Or one like silly example I always use is I see a lot of girls say that they have, they manage social media accounts, but it's important sometimes to list out that you did whatever TikTok and Instagram because a company may be hiring specifically for whatever, TikTok management or Pinterest management. And so I think sometimes those little tweaks of just like looking at the role, seeing what they're listing and putting it on your resume does go a long way because then recruiters can say, okay, this person checks off exactly what I'm looking for. It
Absolutely.
does take a lot of time.
Also, on the note of resumes, really good advice that I've gotten in the past was on your resume, write out your accomplishments, not just what you do. Because at the end of the day, they want to see that you could say that I managed a social calendar, but that doesn't mean anything. Like I managed a social calendar that drove X amount of growth, that drove X amount of engagement. And even when you are more junior, like you could still find those little wins to include. I think for me, that's something that I look for. And that was life-changing advice for me. That's what helped me get the role at Glossier, I think.
I love that phrasing, right? About your accomplishments, not just what you do. I think that's huge. I think I saw in your LinkedIn bio how the way you identify yourself is as a results driven marketer, which I love. And I think showing that that's your perspective from a young age and when you're earlier starting in your career is really valuable. And also reminder to track all of those things. I think sometimes we forget to even track that, or like you may have done a social media internship, but you forgot to, track follower count from when you started versus when you ended. And so it's really, really important to track those things while you're in those roles because it'll make writing your resume so much easier.
Absolutely.
No. So let's go back to Calvin Klein. So you switch over to Calvin Klein, you start there as digital marketing coordinator. You have three roles, different roles where you're there. You were there for 4 years. So talk to me about your experience here, really entering the digital marketing industry.
Right. So just orienting myself back in those days. So back at Calvin Klein, I started as a digital marketing coordinator. I was sitting on a global team. So I was managing our global websites, making sure that all of these different regions that had different business priorities, had different products, different seasonality, making sure that everything still felt like it was cohesively coming from the Calvin Klein brand, whether it was their messaging like in text and copy or their imagery itself. That's essentially what the role was. And I was learning and gaining and getting exposure, but I still wasn't satisfied with where I was. I didn't know what I wanted. And I think that is scary when you're actively in a job and you just don't know where you're going. What ended up happening was at the time, so digital marketing and social media were in the same team. So my counterparts were social media leads. And then they split that up. And digital marketing was staying in marketing and social media was going up to communications on the 13th floor. I was like, bye, see you guys later. And there was a leader on that team who I really admired, someone who I knew I wanted to mold myself after. So it's not necessarily that I wanted to go into social media. I didn't really know much about social media marketing for a brand at the time. I wasn't like gung ho, this is where I want to be, but I knew I wanted to follow that woman because I knew that she was a leader that I really, really wanted to learn from. So
Can I ask what qualities she had or what exactly about her made you want to, follow her footsteps?
she just exuded such confidence. And, she was on the team, then she left for another role and they brought her back. Like she was the glue to the team. She was a cultural force. There's sometimes you just like can't explain it. Like it's not like she did anything in her day to day. It's more of just she just was a born leader. And that at that time, like, I was very shy. I wasn't super confident. And I just recognized that if I followed her steps, she would bring me in the right direction, and I would continue to learn from her. Um, so I took her out to coffee and I told her, I really want to be on your team. What do I need to do? And I don't know what happened, what the stars were aligned. The manager on her team gave notice that day. And
What?
an hour later, I took her out to coffee and the role was mine. So
Oh my gosh.
it just happened. I was so scared to approach her about it too. One, because I didn't want to insult my current manager. Someone who I still to this day have like I'm still in touch with him. Um, but I also like was afraid of the rejection. I didn't have experience in social media. I didn't know if I was right for the role. I just wanted to be on her team and it worked out. So I think a big learning from that is just kind of have guts and again advocate for yourself. I think that's
Yes.
the theme of this episode.
Yes, I love that. Okay, you have to tell me because I very much am or empathizing or sympathizing with what you're saying of how you really admired her, but you were super scared to like go ask her and tell her that you wanted to be on her team. And I'm imagining that there's lots of people maybe listening that have been in a scenario like that or are in a scenario like that where there is either someone that's in senior leadership who are just intimidating naturally because they're older and they're, have more power and more experience. And so how did you approach asking her for coffee? And how did you kind of lead that like session getting coffee of like bringing up that you wanted to make this role? And do you have any advice there for someone maybe looking to do something similar?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. So I'm pretty sure I just Slacked her. Slack is, if anyone doesn't know, it's essentially IM or chat or
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it. And it's like, hey, let's get coffee. I think that at the time it wasn't so off base. Like we were previously on the same team, but I was never close with her. I was a coordinator where she was a VP. Um,
That's a big like seniority jump from coordinator to VP.
yeah. Um, she also probably knew as soon as she got a Slack from me, like, oh, Jamie wants a job. Like
Yeah.
Jamie wants to be on my team. Um, that's how I approached it. And I just kind of closed my eyes and blurted it out. We kind of, how are you? Like had, some small talk. And then I just kind of said it. I knew that it had to get done. I had to say something. There's really no story behind it. Honestly, it's more so just talking yourself into it, maybe like go into the bathroom before, look yourself in the mirror and just say you could do it. Um, worked out in my favor.
And going back to that theme of advocating for yourself, you say that the stars align, but if you wouldn't have talked to her about wanting that role, that open position may have never been yours. And so it took you like speaking up and being vocal about what you wanted to be able to get that opportunity that then became available. And instead of being shy and afraid and saying, I'm too afraid to go like ask her, tell anybody that I want this opportunity, just by like speaking up and saying that, then that made you ready for when I always like to say you create your own luck and creating that own opportunity.
And I think too, going back to like understanding your value too, I think that sometimes when you're junior at a company, I was always really quiet. I was the one who was sitting in meetings and I never voiced my opinion. Actually, this role, this social media role is to this day what I credit as learning to lead and to actually like state my opinions and have my opinions be heard because people actually do care. I just think that sometimes again, like when you're in that mindset, like you don't understand that you you still provide that. Like I was a little coordinator talking to a VP, but I provided value to our team at the end of the day. Um, I just think it's just you shouldn't be in your head. You need sorry, I'm just trying to think like how to word this. Just to have some confidence in yourself because I'm kind of going off. Sorry.
You're good. You're good. Keep going. Well, yeah, you're good.
Okay, I have nothing else to add.
Okay.
Sometimes I start a sentence and I don't know where it's going. And sorry about that.
No, okay. Totally fine. Well, let's go and switch over to do you want to talk a little more about this end at Calvin Klein, or do you want to go switch over to talk about?
But I'll wrap up Calvin Klein and then I could jump myself into Michael Kors.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Okay, let me pause and then I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
Let me think. I need to like, because I need to figure out where I'm gonna cut out where you last said. Okay. That's amazing. So tell me how you then, so you start in this social media path, kind of what does the next, step for you look at Calvin Klein, before kind of moving on to your next role?
So, like I said before, I jumped to this social media role, and the manager, the person who was previously in that role, was gone. So I had no cohort on my team to teach me what I needed to do. I also was rolling into a VP who just had so many other responsibilities and teams that she's working on, where she wasn't really she didn't have the bandwidth essentially to kind of help me with a social calendar. So to this day, like I do credit this role as kind of getting me out of my shell a bit. Suddenly I was sitting in meetings where if I didn't say something for our social calendar or to advocate for our social calendar, then nothing would be done. Um, I learned that I had an opinion that people wanted to hear, because I was the expert in social. And like if we're building a campaign that needs to live on social, like they need to hear from me. And I went from this quiet coordinator on the digital marketing team to somebody who felt comfortable voicing what I felt needed to be voiced.
That's
So
I'll
yeah,
say that's beautiful because I can also like relate to time earlier in my career of just feeling so shy and never wanting to say anything because you never feel like what you have to say is valuable, or you feel like everybody else in the room knows more than you do. So like, what do they want to hear from you? So I love how this is such a significant role in your career, just like a pivot point for you that kind of changed your career trajectory. That's really beautiful.
light and day, honestly. And it had nothing to do with working in social. Honestly, it had everything to do with the team structure and really just feeling empowered in my place. So, I could have still been on a digital marketing team. It's more so that I was given the platform to lead where I didn't have that before, and I forced myself into it. And here I am today. I mean, I've taken so much from that one opportunity and grew it into the leader that I am today. One other thing actually to touch on about
Yeah.
Calvin Klein, um, was that's where I learned about community marketing. We brought on an advocacy team that was a part of social media, but they kind of ran their own account. And this was before like the world of TikTok, where like the everyday person was like really making a name for themselves. Like this was even before influencers became what they are today. Like there was a few big influencers that everybody worked with, and micro influencers like didn't really exist as much at the time. So really had a really interesting experience and a really a learning experience building this advocacy community of these quote unquote diehard Calvin Klein fashion loyalist fans. And it was really pivotal for me because that was the point where we stopped posting our ecom images. We stopped posting these like super mood boardy like content on Instagram, and we started posting what our community wanted and content that provided value for our community. And I think too, seeing the shift in content, but also seeing the results that stemmed from that, hyper growth, hyper engagement, that was also a massive learning experience. And I think was the very beginnings of what marketing has really transitioned to today, where community is paramount.
Yes, I 100% agree. And this is my favorite topic to talk about. So I'm going to wait till you go over your Glossier career, and then I want to jump into your insights on community. I do have a quick question, or if you can clarify. So can you give an example of a post that you used to share like before this transition on Calvin Klein versus like a post that is more community oriented and community driven? Maybe like just something that you post on Instagram.
Yeah, I think that when I say e-com imagery, like content that is shot for a website, not for social, it's just
Mhm.
repurposed on social.
Yes.
Oftentimes it's a model wearing clothing and a bit of like kind of a stiff looking like
Yeah.
stance, really selling product. Whereas community content would be a bit more personality forward. One good example would be UGC. We were doing a lot of regramming UGC, user generated content, at Calvin Klein. And it's really allowing the human and the personality to be the main character. Whereas the products, whether it's Glossier makeup, whether it's Calvin Klein modern cotton bralette, be the supporting character to the story that you're telling.
I'm really now very excited to go into Glossier because I feel like Glossier was so successful with their social because they just are experts at community marketing. And actually in our accelerator, I use Glossier as an example all the time for creating content that is interesting and unique in a space in beauty, where beauty specifically is like so notorious for those very like perfectly like the moisturizer on like a white pedestal and like the perfect swatch. And like Glossier does such a good job at like showing like, you know, how your makeup products actually look when they're used. And overall, I think in the industry, it's been really fun to see brands like switch more towards this community, more towards UGC, and like away from that very like you're saying, like that model posing, you know, and instead of having like a real, you know, Calvin Klein customer like taking a, you know, a mirror selfie and like posting her full fit that has personality and is much more fun. So okay, I love that we're now on this community a little bit more. So can you tell me why you decided to leave Calvin Klein and take the next step in your career?
So I I left Calvin Klein during the pandemic. We were still when it was like 2021, so it was kind of, in the midst of it all. And honestly, it was really just a moment where I understood that I think my growth at the company was like I hit my mark there. I learned so much, and I didn't see really what my next step was there. I knew that I wanted to keep learning, keep absorbing. So I wanted to I made the decision that I wanted to move companies. So I started applying because of that. And I actually ended up going to Michael Kors. I was there for a hot 6 months. It just wasn't, it was a great company. It just wasn't the company for me. For what I wanted to accomplish with my career, it wouldn't be setting myself up for success. There was this time where I was contemplating going back and forth. Am I ready to jump? I just got to Michael Kors. I like 4 months at this point, and I'm like, is this going to look really bad if I leave the company? And I'm not even thinking, I know this is awful to say, like, I'm not even thinking about the people at Kors. I'm thinking more like my resume, my LinkedIn. People are going to see that I was at this company for a really, really short time. And I just kind of was going back and forth. Do I stick it out? Do I keep going? I ultimately made the decision not to start applying to jobs while I was still at Kors. I was going to stick it out. I just wanted to have at least a year under my belt. That was just a personal decision. I don't know if that's best class or not. I think if you're truly not happy somewhere, and it's affecting your mental health, maybe you should consider leaving if that's the case. But I was really fine. But then one day I woke up and I had Glossier in my LinkedIn DMs. And
Oh,
yeah, like I did not apply for this job. Like they reached out to me. I did know somebody who was working there. I don't know how much that worked in my favor to get my foot in the door. But as soon as I saw that DM, there was just something inside me that was just like, I'm leaving Kors. I'm done. Like, I don't even care if it's not Glossier. Like, for some reason, that was the pivotal point for me. Um, and that's what leads me to where I am now.
I love it. I honestly like love that quote. One day I had Glossier. I'm just imagining the t-shirts in my DMs.
Yeah.
I also am really happy that you touched on the like starting your role and realizing that you're unhappy and having kind of that impossible decision on what to do. And I'm also really happy you shared that you actually decided that you were going to stick it out for a year because I've had guests share both positions and both, like you said, are equally valid of, you know, leaving when you're really unhappy versus like saying, okay, I'm just going to like stay for a year and then find the next opportunity. But then fate had other plans for you of moving over to Glossier. So Tell me now that we finally made it to where you currently are now, can you tell me a little bit about what your role looks like at Glossier?
Yeah. So I hinted at this before, but I lead the social team there. We run multiple channels. We're creating content for multiple channels. We are, as the social media world calls it, a jack of all trades. Because we essentially we're not only like posting on these channels, but we're building strategies for them, understanding how it plays into larger brand moments. We're working with creators, we're working with influencers, we're working with our internal creative team. We're shooting content ourselves to have a a bunch of different buckets of content. Ultimately, our goal on the social team is to create a really human, relatable experience, uplifting the voices of the people who wear Glossier products and using our platform as a means for them to tell their stories. We are also selling products, like we are a brand and we have a bottom line at the end of the day, but really threading in our products as a means to uplift personal stories. At Glossier, we call them people first storytelling.
Yeah, like I mentioned before, I think Glossier is just such an incredible example of doing that successfully. And I think a lot of brands want to be where Glossier is, like with being able to have such a community-centric social media strategy. I also want to dive into, because you mentioned that you're not, because I know some social teams are organized differently where like, one channel is like all on one team, another channel is on one team, and you're overseeing all the different channels. So where does, or kind of what does your process look like when you are creating or thinking about strategy for each channel? How do you approach it differently? You don't have to like tell me specifically for all the different channels, but kind of where is your head at or where is your mindset at?
Okay, we typically take an Instagram, TikTok first approach, but our approach on those channels are very different. We kind of identified who is, I mean, we've through channel analytics, we're able to see the demographic who is following us. Or if not, if they're following us, because we know that TikTok does have the For You page, follower count is becoming less and less technically important.
Yeah.
um, Engagement is becoming king. So we also are realistic that this follower count isn't everybody who's seeing our content. From there, we kind of build who is posting on Glossier social, who is posting on Glossier TikTok, like what is our personality? And I think the thing that this is so casual and it's not like I would never like present this in a business meeting, but I think our guiding light is kind of, would I share this in a group chat with my friends?
I
And
love that.
yeah, and that tends to be the, all right, yeah, let's post it. Or no, maybe this is a little too stiff for us, or maybe this is a little too raw and gritty. We need to like polish it up a little bit. But that's like kind of like high level.
Yeah, I think that's such a good statement because I think you can apply that to like any industry and any role. I always like to think of, because not even, with your career, not all of us get to start off at, something in like beauty at like Glossier, like you may be starting your career working for a not so exciting company. And sometimes I feel like those Instagrams can be very boring because they just post like our services, what we sell, like why you should buy from us, like versus actually sharing something interesting. And we see brands that have been so successful, like Duolingo on TikTok, for example, like they're not selling you Duolingo software. They're, like you said, they're creating something that you want to go share with your friend. And so I love that distinction. I also love how you also made the distinction between on TikTok, follower count does not matter as much, and how maybe on Instagram it is more of a, a KPI, but maybe not as much importance on TikTok, because I do agree with you, they are very different.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, oh, there's something you just said that I wanted to touch on. Forget it. Ask your next question.
Okay, all good. So we talked about your approach there with strategy, and I love that. I hope everyone takes that of like, would I share this in the group's chat? I think that's such a good kind of, checkpoint or like filter for your content of what you should share or not. And then you manage a lot of different, people on your team. Can you speak a little bit to kind of what excites you, or like what qualities or skills you're looking for in some of the like earlier or entry level roles specifically for like other women who want to work in beauty marketing and are just starting out? Do you have any advice for them there?
I think what I look okay, so this actually, when I said I had something I wanted to say, I now remember, and I
Perfect.
think it plays in well to this response too. We're in an age where brand marketing is king, right? So I think that the way that marketing is shifting, brands that have personality are the brands that are coming out in the forefront. These are the brands that are winning on social. Um, to an extent, that's obviously not a catch-all, but generally speaking, that's where I'm seeing brands win. And I think that when I am looking for somebody to bring onto my team, I want to see that one, they should be tapped in. They should understand culture. They should have an understanding of beauty. They should know what's going on. They're on the platforms. They're scrolling on their own TikToks, on their Instagrams. They love YouTube. I think that's really important. I think something too that I look for, and I actually just brought a coordinator onto my team, so I did actually just go through this, but really just generally, even if you don't know everything, I would rather hear that, oh, I don't, maybe you don't know the answer to a question in an interview, but you're showing curiosity and you're showing the willingness of, oh my God, I need to learn that.
Mm.
And I think that the way that you position it and that you sell yourself is that you are eager to absorb and to grow. And it's less so like I'm an expert in social. Like, no, you're not an expert in social. You just graduated. You don't know what running a brand account is. It's very different than a personal account. But that's not necessarily always a bad thing. Like you come with a different perspective, and I think as long as you show the eagerness and you're motivated. To me, it's less so, yes, I want to see that you have the skill, but I also want to see that you have the ability to learn the skill. And I think
Yeah.
that's it's see in an interview and when you're talking to people and when you're learning about them.
I think that's incredible advice. And especially because, like, you make a good point, is that I think you go into an interview when you're younger and you're like, I have to meet all the requirements. I have to know all of this stuff. And at the end of the day, especially for entry level roles, like, they don't expect you to know everything. But like what you said, is your biggest asset is your willingness to learn, your curiosity, being coachable, wanting to absorb that knowledge. And I love that advice there of like showcasing and really, really leaning into that instead of trying to like pretend that you're an expert because you feel like you need to do that to get the job. Uh, you don't. And I
It's
think
showing
that's,
up. It's really just showing up as your authentic self.
yeah,
I think that's kind of what we're touching on here. Don't fake it because you could see when it's not authentic and you're faking it.
yeah. Okay, you also mentioned being tapped in to kind of what's going on with social and just pop culture or with culture in general. I'm also curious on your perspective since you've worked in social media for a little while now, and obviously when pandemic came and changed the game, TikTok came and changed the game, like things are always changing. I'm curious for you, what do you feel like is a trend that is either really big right now or kind of that we're going towards, or how do you kind of see the social media landscape changing?
Mm, that's a good question because it's always changing. I think that so in the last few years, especially with the immersion of TikTok, we have seen other channels are falling into this like more raw, gritty, authentic like content. Not everything needs to be super polished. We're also seeing a rise in entertainment. This isn't new. This isn't where it's heading. This is where we're already going. I think we're going to continue. Oh, that's a good question. Where do I see social media going? I mean, honestly, I think we're going to continue seeing video forward. I would love to see the platforms start to build their own personalities again. I mean, I think has been playing catch up with TikTok for so long, and they kind of took a step back and they're like, okay, we need to kind of identify who we are and what our purpose is again. Like our Reels views aren't getting the views like they did last year because they're moving away from it. We're starting to see more carousels and like approaching content through that way. I think something else that's really interesting, not so much from an own social perspective, but from a creator perspective, is this continued democratization of creators across different channels, where it used to be that if you weren't working with a Kardashian, then like that, like the reach of them, like, you know, like having those like macro, even micro creators, like I think that we're continuing to see the importance and the value of these, whether they're nano or whether they don't even have that big of a following at all, like everybody has the opportunity to go viral. And again, this is really like what's happening now. I just think that, in my opinion, like that's going to continue strengthening, and that's where
Yeah.
we're going to go. And that's why at Glossier too, we're putting a lot of we're paying a lot of attention to like the everyday consumer. They are just as important to us as the influencers and the celebrities. You know, they are who we're speaking to.
Yeah. And I think that also has to be hard, especially in the beauty industry where influencers just feel, I mean, I feel like the brands I see all the time a lot are just the brands that are sending influencers all the product or paying influencers for like the big influencers, like the biggest brand deals. And then sometimes I also think about, well, I always use Lush as like the extreme example of like how they choose to like not be on social. But then there's like also the in between of like brands trying to figure out like how obviously to have creators and influencers be a part of your strategy, but also still making sure that, like you guys say, is like prioritizing the consumer and prioritizing like the everyday user of Glossier makeup.
Mhm. Actually, one other thing that I'll even add to this is the the we call it IRL experience, the activations, the physical being
Yes.
your consumer. And from a social media lens, it's really interesting to kind of revise and constantly shift my strategy, where we're showing up digitally and in real life with our audience and with our following, making our social digital community feel like they have access to us both on Instagram and TikTok, but also giving them the ability to meet us in real life, which is also great as a marketer too, because then we get to actually meet and understand and learn from our community, as opposed to our community just watching us through a screen.
Yeah. I've never been to a Glossier pop-up, but they look beautiful. I'm assuming, have you been to a couple? Because I know you do them in New York a lot.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Oh,
the store events are like not even events, just going to the stores are such a interesting experience. I always say our Glossier stores are like museums. They're crafted perfectly for content creation, but they're also just so beautiful to look at. It's our team does a phenomenal job.
oh. They're not, there's permanent locations as well in New York for Glossier.
Yeah, we've moved away from the pop-up model
Okay.
since the pandemic actually, and we have 10 retail locations, two in New York. Where are you based?
I'm in Austin, but I'm actually going to be in New York next month, so I'll have to go to the one in New
Let
York.
me know. I'll come in. I would love
Oh,
to meet in person.
yes, yes. I will let you know. I'm actually going to be spending a good amount of time in New York in the next year, so I will let you know. I definitely really want to see a Glossier store because I've only seen them in photos, and they, like you said, they look beautiful.
They're immersive. They're really fun.
Oh. Okay, Jamie. Well, time has honestly just flown by. I feel like I could just keep picking your brain and just hearing all your thoughts on social and career. This has been such a valuable episode. So thank you so much for sharing all of your insight. My last question for you today is just, do you have any other advice for women in marketing who maybe want to have a career like yours?
I that's I would probably suggest that, like, honestly, I already said it and I'm going to say it again because I'm going to stress the importance of it, is advocate for yourself. um I don't know if anyone who's listening is like me, but I've personally had a lot of men in my life tell me like, oh no, you don't need to say that, like you're going to come off complaining, you're going to sound bossy, you're going to sound this or that, like um when, you know, if I feel like I'm ready for a promotion or I want that next move. And I think that women have sometimes a different experience in the workplace. And I just think it's important to, when it's appropriate and when, like, as long as it's done tastefully and done well, you should definitely always feel like um you should feel comfortable advocating for yourself and get used to being in that habit, because you're the only one who will advocate for you. And you know what you want, and sometimes you just got to stick your neck out there in order to get it.
That's beautiful, and I love how you also quickly mentioned there that sometimes there's people that will tell us that you shouldn't speak up for yourself or make you doubt yourself, and it's super important to stay true to who you are, advocate for yourself, and I think we've said it a lot in this episode, so I think that's perfect. Thank you so much, Jamie. This has honestly just been so much fun and chatting with you and going through your journey. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. This was really fun, actually. So I appreciate you taking the time chatting with me.